Hi, I'm Ashrita, a 16-year-old Avanti student from JNV, Telangana. I love studying biology and I want to become a neurosurgeon. Welcome to Avanti, a show where incredible women who are at the top of their fields share the obstacles they had to overcome to get there. Here's our host, Vandana Goyal.
Growing up in Malaysia, Sumitra Pasupathy learned the value of education at a very young age. After both her parents had to drop out of school to support their families, her mother invested heavily in Sumitra and her brother's studies, a dedication that would pay off when Sumitra made it all the way to the steps of Cambridge University. After graduating from Cambridge as the first female president of the Engineering Society, Sumitra worked at Procter & Gamble, where she has 2 patents to her name. Eager to return to Asia, Sumitra and her family moved to Singapore after the birth of their first son. It was here that she shifted her focus to the development sector. First by founding Playeum, an NGO that focuses on children and play, and then by becoming the global stewardship lead at Ashoka. Welcome, Sumi.
Hello.
So nice to have you on our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You have a fascinating story, and I wanted to start from the beginning. I would love to talk about where you came from and who you were as a young girl.
Yeah, so I am Malaysian by origin, and my heritage is I'm actually a Sri Lankan Tamil. I love to tell the story. My sons are the 5th generation migrants to Malaysia and Singapore. So my great-grandparents traveled all the way from Jaffna in Sri Lanka to Singapore, and then my grandmother actually then moved up into Malaysia and eventually ended up in Kuala Lumpur.
And can you describe to me a little bit about what you were like as a young girl?
I think I was always described a little bit like a tomboy. I was very, very driven. I would outrun all the boys. And then I wouldn't understand. I would fall down in school and I'd have cuts and everything. And sometimes the boys and other girls would be crying, but I was like, oh, what's the big deal? I'd get up and go again. So I think I was pretty hardcore as a child. I loved school. School was a very, very big part of my life. Learning was fun. But I also liked creating, and I did a lot of sport. I did a lot of theater. I did a lot of acting.
So how did being in this school shape you and your value system?
The school that I was in was a mission school, and it was an all-girls mission school, and it was run by the nuns originally pre-colonial times, and then a set of Christian principals who took over. These were very strong women. Like, these were vanguards. These women were legacies. They made such a big difference in so many people's lives, right? The decisions they made, the direction they set the school in, how they brought the girls along. The values that they believed in was, I'd have to look it up, but it was Nisi Dominus Fustra, which really guided us to be strong, bold, disciplined women that would make a difference, right? So we all hated it, but somehow I ended up being a school prefect nearly most of my school life, which meant I went around like a policewoman with this little book, checking on everybody else. But we also developed this work ethic. So in this particular school, we had to even wash toilets. Like, everybody in the school had class cleaning duty. I think that's the one thing I'd never forget. Not many schools had this, but we'd had to participate in cleaning the classroom, and there would be a competition in the cleanest classroom. We had to participate in toilet cleaning. Each classroom had a toilet dedicated to it. There'd be a toilet cleaning competition, and that would be on a weekly basis. So we really learned to not only be strong, steadfast women, but to clean up after ourselves and to care for everything that involves us and to support each other.
And tell me a little bit about your parents. I know that you've spoken a little bit about how they weren't able to fulfill all of what they wanted to study because they were the primary breadwinners in your family and in their families before that?
So my parents were both part of a bigger family. And though they weren't the oldest in their families, like you said, Vandana, they opted out of education, particularly my mom. My mom had an opportunity at a place to go into university, but she was not able to take up that place because she had to support the family. Her father had died at a very young age, just as my dad's father had also died at a very young age. So they very early on were living in single parent homes. In my mom's case, my grandmother was a community builder and she was doing enterprising things to keep the family together, but she wasn't a breadwinner. So she had to send the children out to be employed and to feed the family so that they could, feed the younger siblings in the family. Same thing with my dad. He had to drop out of high school to get an education as a nurse first and then nursing tutor, and in order to support the family. So at least in my mom's side of the family, the first generation university, the second person to go to university and the first woman to go to university. So how has that shaped me? I think effort. My parents were they worked very, very hard. They gave a lot, not only to us, but to the community. I felt like even though it was just me and my brother growing up, I felt like I was growing up in a family of 30 cousins. We were very much close to our community. My parents are almost like community elders. It was difficult for us, even as children, to fully understand that, or even young adults to fully appreciate that. But what it has taught me is that we do live in community. We do live dependent on each other, and that care matters. My parents taught me a lot around care. I mean, they cared a lot for people, and it was always unconditional care.
Did you ever think about how your mom had to sacrifice pursuing her education and the sacrifices they made? Did you ever feel a responsibility to fulfill some of that yourself?
They had dreams for us, particularly my mom's. My mom was the vision builder, the one that wanted more for us because she didn't have those opportunities. So she's very passionate about education. Even now at 82, she's still advancing education initiatives for children from marginalized communities and refugee communities. How did that affect me? She had the dream that she always wanted us to have a high quality education. And she worked very hard to make sure we got into the right schools. But I think her sense of ambition and vision definitely influenced us. Yeah.
And you decided, I'm not going to just go to any university. I'm going to go to Cambridge University, one of the best universities in the world. And you call that moment chasing your impossible dream.
Yeah.
So can you tell us that story?
I think I was just very, very lucky. I mean, actually, the story was, I didn't even know. I was from a low middle income family. We didn't even know what Cambridge or Oxford meant. I didn't even know what that meant. But I remember the story at the age of 13 or 14. I was quite driven and motivated. By now, I was always in the top 5 of the class, and I was just obsessive about scores. Somewhere between 13 or 14, I remember having a conversation with my mom, actually, about education and education in the future. And given our household income and the opportunities that were available to us, it would be very difficult for my family to sustain both my brother and me for a high quality education. And what is a high quality education? Because Malaysia practices affirmative action policy, which means university places are limited for non-Malay communities, right? So it would mean it'd be difficult to get into the best universities or the courses of your choice in Malaysia. So studying overseas was seen as the best pathway out. So that's what my mom meant. To afford for both of you to go and study overseas would be really too much for the family to bear. That for me was like, my mind I didn't understand that. I couldn't understand that because right up to this point, at 12 and 13, my whole life was, if I was the best and if I could be the best that I could be, then of course everything should come my way. And I don't think, in all fairness, I don't think my mom, I think she was just telling me very pragmatically what was happening. But what happened for me was it completely changed me as a person. Because then I realized, oh my goodness, I have to get my act together. I really have to take this into my own hands to achieve something bigger and better. And then when we came to university admissions, it was my best friend's who actually asked me to apply to Cambridge because her father wanted her to apply. And so she said, well, if I'm going to apply, because her grades were not as good as mine, if I'm going to apply, then Sumi has to apply. So she literally said, Sumi, you better apply. So I was like, Cambridge, what? Huh? I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know anything about it. So I went to the British Council, they helped me apply, and I was just very lucky to get in. But we still couldn't afford it. So even though I got the offer and the place, it wasn't still a guarantee that I would go because of the cost. It was even more expensive than a standard university. But I was very lucky in the end to get a scholarship. Yeah.
And I'm just imagining little Sumi, 18 years old, with her perfectly plaited hair, arriving in Cambridge next to the elite in the UK. And what a shock that must have been for you. How did you handle those first few months? And did being there live up to the expectations that you had?
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea, right? I had never traveled outside Malaysia, like even KL. I'd only been to Singapore and back and traveled within Malaysia, but I never traveled abroad. I've never been on a plane. You can imagine, right? So I do show up. We don't have all the right clothes. I remember wearing this really thin, normal flat cotton cloth, 3 months in Cambridge, and it was October. And I was going out in the evening, and then I was coming back, and suddenly my whole body started to shake because I wasn't wearing the right clothes. So it was completely a different world. But I loved it. It was a big, big life-changing moment for me. It completely changed my life. I met my husband. I was studying engineering. It was the best years of my life. I really found myself there. But I do think my years in school, my teenage years and my years in school prepared me for that moment.
You also became the first female president of the Cambridge Engineering Society.
Yeah.
I would love to know what the ratio of engineers, gender ratio of engineers was at Cambridge at the time and how you became the first female president of that prestigious society.
So the Cambridge system is based on colleges, like people stay in different colleges. And the college that I stayed in was I was the third batch of girls in that college, right? So that was way back. So men were everywhere.
And you just rose to the top. I'm going straight to the top.
Academically, by the time I got to Cambridge, I was pretty average, okay? And then I let that go. I was very happy to let that go.
Just to be there.
To be there. And I also realized, I remember the first day of my engineering professor said that once you're here, you're here. This education is much more than the books. This is about the person you want to become. So I think it was that same trajectory that got me into becoming the president of the Chemical Engineering Society. I've always enjoyed being slightly different. I feel blessed in that I haven't struggled with being in a minority because Malaysia also has only 10 to 15% Indians or people of Indian origin or Sri Lankan origin in total, 10 to 15%. So they're quite small numbers. I'm quite comfortable being in minority.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we are different and if we are willing to sort of contribute and participate, which my principals taught me in primary school, then you can bring something to the table, right? Because the way you do things, the ideas that you present at these meetings. And with the Engineering Society, it was simply because they've been run very traditionally until then. So all I did was simple things like branding and marketing. I made the posters look a little bit better and I hosted better events, right?
Which is great for an engineer.
Yeah, great.
If you had a good comm strategy.
I had a good comms and branding strategy and a partnership strategy. So I'd get the top draw CEOs to come and present and, and do those things. And I think I was quite fearless. I think that's what I learned from my primary school and through my time in Cambridge. Unless you contribute and be part of something and not be afraid of failing, you will never know unless you try.
So I got to know you in your full leadership avatar in the development sector And I had no idea that you actually started off as an engineer in your professional life, first at Kraft Jacobs and then at Procter and Gamble. So what did being an engineer in a corporate setting teach you?
Yeah, so the good thing about engineering versus the pure sciences is that you learn to be very organized, you learn to be very logical, you learn to be a problem solver, and you learn to develop critical thinking, right? So I think those skills become really very important. So for me, I think working in the private sector, those were some of the skills that I learned. The other thing I think I learned is also that you need to be working in teams. Like very early on, even though I was, entry level, I was very lucky. I had a very, very good boss. And she worked part time. And incidentally, there were women bosses. Very early on, I learned to work in that team and work at a level 2 or 3 levels higher than me. So I didn't just do what was needed. I learned to work to do more than what was needed and to continuously self improve and to come up with new ideas. And I remember my first day at work, the head of the department, like 4 or 5 levels up for me, he went to Cambridge. So he took all the, always takes the Cambridge joinees out for lunch. And the advice he gave me then at lunch, I always take with me, and I tell young people everywhere, is that he said to me, many people don't know what they want, especially early on in their careers, and they're too afraid to express what they want. So either they don't know or they're too afraid to express. If you've got an idea about what you want and how you want to move forward, feel free to put it out there, because until it's heard, you don't know how good the idea was. And if you want something, ask for it, and you can do that in a polite way. You can do that in a way that is positive and inclusive and not competitive, but in a way that's productive. And I thought that was very helpful. And I think that's what I learned from the corporate sector.
You also have 2 patents to your name, which you got when you were at Procter and Gamble, which I think is very cool. What did you invent?
Oh, well, that sounds better than it is. In corporate, you get a lot of stuff. So I did work in innovations. Are you ready for this? This is not high tech, not, fancy computers or anything like that. This was soap powder, okay? So we worked
That's
on
cool. What did you do with the soap powder?
No, we worked out a new formulation, and I didn't. I just worked in the team. The scientists came up with a formulation. I tested the formulation with consumers and with research institutes to show that the formulation was more superior. And so I was part of a team that validated the use of this new formulation and the product rollout. So I've discovered since then that my juju, my energy is actually in creation and creativity, which I would have never thought when I was in primary school and secondary school.
And somewhere along this path, you got married and had children also while you were inventing things. So tell me about that story and how that shifted your life.
So I met my husband in university too. So we've known each other since almost 30 years now.
Wow.
And we got married, 5 years later, and then had kids 4 or 5 years after that. So we have 3 boys, 19, 17, and 12-year-old.
And you moved to Singapore
Yeah, so then
along the way.
along the way, so Rohan was born in London. We were still working. I was still working in the private sector then. We've always tried to come back to Asia, to work in Asia. My husband's also of Indian origin. So we thought, well, we wanted to come back home, come back to Asia, and to also contribute back to Asia. So we decided to go to Singapore. And then that's when my second and third sons were born. And that's also when I decided to shift away from private sector into the development space. I started my own NGO, my own organization. And
Playeum.
Playeum, that focus on children and play.
And where did that come from?
That's another big pivot. And I think that's this idea of problem solving, right? So when I came back to Singapore, I thought I'd end up going back into the private sector and doing another 9 to 5 type of job. But then I started listening into what, my cousins and friends and communities, some of the things they were talking about. And parents were still very stressed about education in Singapore. That's been a huge issue since when I was little growing up, with my cousins and everything. And it didn't seem right because I was seeing children and families being so much more happy and connected and enjoying their learning experiences in places like the UK and Holland and Europe and the US. But when you come back to somewhere like Singapore, school becomes not a place. I loved school, but children were no longer loving school because it was very, very directive, very competitive, overpressured, and just simply not joyful. So my co-founder and I decided to start this nonprofit organization focused on uplifting children's voices, to see children as powerful, and also to bring play back into children's lives.
And Playeum is how you got connected to Ashoka.
Right.
Because you reached out to them for a partnership.
Yes.
And then Ashoka ended up playing a really big part of your kind of career and your leadership in the development sector. So what drew you to Ashoka?
Yeah, so Ashoka was like another university for me, like an understanding that, one of the big things Bill believed in and what Ashoka is about is that everybody can take action to solving problems, that everyone has agency, that everyone can contribute. It's not just the university degree you have, and it's not that one pathway into Cambridge or IIT or IIM that's going to set you up for life. It's that everyone can take steps towards creating the future that they want. What I really got drawn by this is this idea of the change maker, right? And the idea of the change maker is someone who takes creative actions to solving problems. Now, if you look at the world that we're living in right now and everything that is happening, we're definitely going to need more change makers than we are going to need degree holders. It's not that it's either or, but this idea, the self-efficacy, the self-knowing that you are able to take action to solve problems and that you have it in you is, I think, quite powerful. It's the first time I'm sharing this, but I didn't realize I had it till I joined Ashoka. It's only in my time in Ashoka that I remembered the things I did at 14 and the things that I did at 16 with my friends that were new, that I was trying to create new things and make was so important to who I am right now.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the young people listening to us and wondering how many of them would raise their hands if we asked them if they were a change maker. And I don't know if many would. And what does it take to create that shift in the way that they see themselves?
Yeah, that's a great, great question. It took me a while to realize what gets in our way is often ourselves. Every day you are taking a step to doing something that you are afraid of, you're unsure, you are leaning into something different, you are taking a different action. It's just that we often self-censor ourselves, stop ourselves, or not even recognize what we're doing. If we come from a very difficult household, if getting on the bus and getting to school is a challenge in itself, that is a change maker. I remember when I was working with kids where parents would not let them out of the house to go to school because there was so much to do at home. And for that child to step out of the house and go to school, you are creating a change. So it's in the small things as much as it is in the big things. And I think believing in yourself and finding a mentor or a ally or a friend, like my best friend who said, you've got to apply as well, I think really matters because I think it sits with all of us.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about us as women and some of the choices in our life that we have to make that are different as a result of, being women. One of them, I think, happened to you earlier on in your life, about the opportunities you had access to. Some of them are really positive. Like I think your grandmother was a community builder. Your mother worked in a nonprofit. You also describe her as a community builder. So there's this beautiful aspect of women as community builders and creators. I'm wondering how that shaped you, seeing your mother and grandmother and playing those roles.
Yeah, so I have to be honest, like I didn't even really up to about 5 years ago, I didn't notice the distinction. So I would not have easily self-identified myself as a female leader or something different from leaders as a whole. And largely because a lot of the times I was in the minority. And I realized then I didn't fully embrace the power of being a woman. I was just playing the boys' game, the old game, in the old way. What does that mean? Like work really hard, perform results, generate things, muscle your way in, push, drive, and push everything through, and make things happen. Very rational, very organized, very method driven. And I didn't fully embrace or didn't even have the skills that I think women generally have. I always talk about them in terms of masculine skills and feminine skills. So that those are very, my sons, men have a lot of strong, rational skills and confidence and ability to do things. But women also have, apart from those skills, they also have the relational skills, which I think are really quite important. The empathy, the building the teams, the emotional skills, the emotional awareness, the ability to influence, the ability to bring people along, the ability to build teams, the ability to collaborate. Those skills I did not have, I did not value, and I didn't know how to get. So my journey into discovering my own feminine power and the strength that women have is a new one. And I'm really excited about it because I think it's about bringing the best of both these values, right? It's not either or.
Yeah, you're right. I think in some ways we talk so much about gender that we can do a disservice to the girls by always seeing themselves at a disadvantage versus seeing what we have naturally within us as a strength also. So I'm just wondering how we help young women find that earlier. One of the challenges that we see, not just in India, but in the world, is how many young women see themselves as engineers, as problem solvers, as people who can create and build things, fix things. So what does it take in your mind to overcome? It's not just an academic barrier, right? These are barriers in our mind, barriers that are created in society. So what does it take to overcome that?
Yeah, because they're cultural barriers. My only thing I would say is to help girls find role models and mentors, find more and more allies within the system. And the allies can be men as well and boys as well. But I think building this network of allies, network of support. I remember I was more shy of asking people to be a mentor or a supporter or advisor. We tend not to lean in as much. So I think that would be one thing I would think about. How can we offer our time to mentor more and to be part of networks that support more girls and become role models?
And one of the other barriers that we see when we look more systemically at some of these challenges, right? And the female participation in the workforce in India is 20% and declining, and the percentage of skilled women in the workforce is actually even lower. And even lower when you go into fields, technical fields. The biggest drop-off happens not just after marriage, but after having children. And I just wanted to understand, you have 3 kids. One of them is still young. Did you take time away from work? How did you make sure you went back to the workplace? Was that always a goal that you had?
It's a great question, and I've had to learn along the way. A dear friend of mine who's been really successful in a career once said to me, and I always think about this quite a lot, that women can have it all, but they can't have it all at once. And I thought that was quite a powerful invitation. But I never thought about it that way. And I think, firstly, that women should continue, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use lean in, but I mean it in much more wider sense than the book, but really continue to participate fully, but pick the set of conditions, the situations, and the choices that they're making. I think one of the challenges is we don't talk about it enough, how challenging it is to continue with caregiving, with keeping a home together, and having a career or a vocation. So my sense is that it's going to be difficult. How do you plan and organize for it to be able to continue with it? That's one. 2 is we can't do all exciting things at the same time. My sense is sometimes we want the fastest moving career or the vocation or the jobs at the same time as having a new baby in the house. It's not about the promotion or the advancement in the next 2 years. It's about the next, looking at work over a 50-year horizon. I feel like I have finally found my job of life, and I will be working for the next 30 years. But if you asked me that in 1998 when I was at P&G getting patents and I changed jobs there every 3 years. I don't think I was really in my groove. I was really happy. But now if you ask me, it's not because I'm older, but I love what I do, and it's going to be for the next 50 years. There'll be different iteration, but I love the space that I'm in. 50 years, 30 years. So I don't plan to live to 100. So I think doing what you love, pacing it, going eyes wide open in, and asking for help.
And who is an ally for you?
I think my husband has always been my strongest ally. I've been very, very lucky with that. Interestingly, I think career-wise, it's always been a little bit with men that have been very supportive. Like I said, that first boss who said, always say what you want. After that, the guy below him was also the same. He always asked me what I wanted, and he'd always give me feedback. So I think when it comes to building your network of allies, it can be family members, it can be friends, but it can also be, men in your network. I think that can be very powerful.
Beautiful. What a privilege to speak to you and to spend this hour learning from you. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing all of that with me and with the world. Okay, this question is from an Avanti student named Monica. She's a 17-year-old girl from Bangalore. She is the first child to study in a school of national repute in her family, and she has motivated her siblings and cousins to study as well. And she asked, as girls, many of us face a lot of challenges to reach our educational milestones and have a career. Did you face any of these challenges in your life, and how did you overcome them?
I've had many setbacks from the milestones that I hope to achieve, but I always look at challenges as ways to improve and to learn about myself even more. I trust that you're working your best and your hardest, and that if something was not meant to be, then it's not meant to be. What can you learn from it? What can you take away from it? And how do you move forward? I think that's the way I've kind of overcome most of the challenges ahead of us.
Thanks so much to Sumitra for being on the show. If you enjoyed that episode, do tune in every week as we sit down with more remarkable women. The podcast is hosted by Avanti Fellows, a nonprofit that breaks the cycle of poverty in India by providing access to post-secondary education for students from underserved communities. With this show, we aim to inspire thousands of young people with these real-life stories of incredible female leaders who have made a lasting impact on their industries. To learn more about the work we do, visit www.avantifellows.org.